Hello, I'm Ken Kinsley, and this is Finding the Words, the only podcast devoted to text-based art and artists. On August 5th, 2001, a worker in a hard hat and reflective vest climbed up onto the 110 freeway sign in downtown Los Angeles to correct an oversight. He added a 5 shield and north to the left side of the sign so that motorists would finally have some warning that the 5 north off-ramp is coming up on the left. Pretty normal stuff, right? There was just one little detail. The worker didn't work for Caltrans. His name was Richard Ankrom, and he was going rogue in what he dubbed the Guerrilla Service project. A sign maker by trade, he meticulously researched, assembled, and installed the exactingly perfect replica in broad daylight. It was so perfect, nobody batted an eye for 8 months. And even after the story broke and he did numerous interviews for national news outlets, the sign remained in place for years. He even filmed a documentary about the piece, which you can find a link for in the show notes. Besides Guerrilla Service Project, his sign work is all over Los Angeles, with everything from new projects like the Silver Lake Conservatory of Music to restoring landmarks like the Santa Monica Pier merry-go-round sign and Felipe's original French dip. In addition, he has an incredibly varied and extensive fine art practice, which includes both text-based and non-text-based works in a variety of mediums. Plus, there are a few more projects out there that, due to the very nature of their being, shall we say, not quite completely legal, he feels compelled to not reveal for a little bit longer. I met Mr. Ankrom a few months ago at his studio in the Art Brewery near downtown Los Angeles during their twice-yearly open house, and he agreed to sit down with me to chat about signs, art, the infamous freeway sign, of course, and just how much longer his other projects need to stay quiet. Here's my chat with Richard Ankrom. Now, most people probably know you as the guy behind the Guerrilla Service Project, which I'd definitely like to get into in a little bit. But you've had a really interesting and varied career as an artist and a sign maker. And like in terms of signs, people in Los Angeles have seen your work all over town, whether they knew it or not. You've done hand-painted signs, the Silver Lake Conservatory of Music, the Pacific Design Center. If you've been to Petit Trois, people have seen your gold leaf, and you've done a number of restoration projects at Larry's Chili Dog in Burbank, the merry-go-round sign on the Santa Monica Pier, the Brown Derby, Felipe original French dip. How did you get started in sign making?
It was by accident. I hitchhiked here from the Seattle area, and I was looking for anything, just kind of work, because I was homeless and jobless. And I
Wow.
stumbled into basically a sign shop, and I learned how to do. This was in the 70s, so they were doing sandblasted wood signs and 3D foam letters and that sort of thing. And they did service on neon, and they did fluorescent lights. But these guys were kind of flaky. There's a term for it in the business. They're called snappers, and they'll come in and do the job, and sometimes they'll just collect the down payment and not do the job. They're flaky. So anyway, I hung out with these guys and learned some of the basics of all that, and I realized that tooling up for all this was going to be like with a crane truck, and then all this equipment you need and all the rest. I decided to start to learn hand painting because it made more sense. There's a lot less cost and a much higher profit margin, because once you learn the skill, you kind of just take off. So I apprenticed in a sign shop called City Signs with Johnny Saint back in the 80s, before computers came out and could cut out of vinyl. So I learned that just before the Gerber Scientific Company made the first plotter. So I learned how to hand letter. Basically, it was a 50-50 deal. Some customer would come in with a job and would split it down the middle. I did all the work. He supplied the shop, the customer, and some of the supplies. But you had to learn how to paint the sign, basically. And so that's how I learned. I learned on the job. The work looked terrible at first because it takes years to get any good at it. But
Oh,
that's how
oh yeah.
I kind of learned my way into the sign painting. And then I met another guy named Hawkins who taught me the gold leaf because he was just getting too old and shaky to do it anymore. So he had some
Mm,
jobs he couldn't finish, so he hired me to help finish it. But I also learned how to do the gold leaf, which is a more complicated process than the sign painting. So I sort of apprenticed my way up through there. But it was just sort of chance to get in the sign business in the first place. But I could see the linkage between art and lettering because you could do logos and design and all that more or less comes into play. So it was an artistic. At least I could sort of stay in shape, so to speak. You know, I'm still drawing and painting and artistic stuff now. After you do the guy's sign, you get the money. It's a lot faster. It's a lot easier than say painting murals. So it's just a lot easier and faster. And I eventually worked my way up to better customers, people who were fussier, more high
hmm
profile. I had to get liability insurance, so all these things just sort of added up. So eventually, I got some good customers, and it was from online, from posting these images online. Some of them.
Yeah. And did you grow up doing art, or did
Yeah.
you kind of get into art through the sign making?
No, I was called an artist in kindergarten. I didn't even know what it meant.
Okay.
So I was already drawing work like a couple levels advanced. So I've always had the talent. There were several other
hmm
kids I noticed in school that had the talent, but they never. But I guess this happens to a lot of people. They just drop it after. I stuck with it.
Now, with the sign making, do you prefer the newer signs, or do you like doing the restoration pieces?
The new signs are easier to do because you start with new materials.
Yeah.
You don't have to try and save something that's rusted or fallen apart, or it's just easier to do new things,
hmm
and the money's usually better. And that's not just me.
hmm
It's like anybody in the sign business. There's the service aspect where you change light bulbs and fix them, but there's always more work. It's a lot easier just to make something new. You know, like it's
hmm
just easier to work with new materials instead of like old rusted junk.
And when I met you, we met at the art brewery,
Yeah,
at the walk through the brewery. And when I came up and started talking to you, you were working on fixing up a Geiger counter. You just love working with your hands and fixing stuff and making stuff.
yeah, that's part of it. Sometimes
Yeah.
by making things, uh, you get informed on more of the painting. So by just not painting, doing something else.
Mm.
And the Geiger counter, I
hmm
just was just kind of a goof, kind of a nerd thing that I
Sure.
yeah, and so it was like just kind of a
In a good
fun
way.
thing to have around. It's stupid, but it's but it was fun. So I just rebuilt a Geiger counter, and I learned a bunch of history about this too. That there was a
hmm
uranium craze, like the gold rush. There was an uranium rush in the early 50s. And so a bunch of companies right here in Los Angeles started making these consumer grade Geiger counters. And there were like two or three companies in town. It was such a big fad. It only lasted a couple of years once people realized that there wasn't any to
Like pet
find.
rocks, basically, or
Yeah, well, because the U.S.
yeah.
government put out like a bounty to try and find uranium. This is when we were making atom bombs with Russia. So there was this entire logic behind all this of like, oh shit, we need uranium all of a sudden. So they had all
Eh,
hands on deck attitude of let's find uranium here in America. And so then this Geiger counter craze started, and so then I learned all this stuff just by
Huh.
rebuilding a Geiger counter. And what I did was you can buy all these aftermarket chips, a solid state chip. These old Geiger counters were
Mhm.
tubes, and they used all sorts of two different types of batteries to even run the thing. And now I could run it all on three AAA batteries. So I just basically hardwired the chip into it's sort of like a resto mod. Or you just update the whole thing, and it does work. It doesn't work the way it originally worked. It does work, but not quite like the original. But it does function.
Sure.
So I got that far with it.
Hmm.
But it was fun to kind of figure out how to take this board and integrate it with the old stuff.
Did people find any uranium? I mean, are we sitting
There
on
was
top
one
of
guy.
nuclear?
When I looked into the story, there was one guy who made a fortune. He turned into a millionaire because he found a mine in Utah. But it seems like everybody
Mhm.
else who went out there looking for it ended up with nothing because there just wasn't that much out there to
Yeah.
find. But apparently, this one guy, and once that hit the news, there was this craze for Geiger counters. Oh, there might be some in my backyard. So they all buy a Geiger counter and they go hunting for uranium. So there was this one case where I think, and that's what fueled the fire. So it was like the guy finding
Like
gold.
100 years after the gold rush.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
it's very, very. It has all the same earmarkings of exactly that. Where it was a uranium rush.
Interesting.
There was even a Bowery
That's
Boys
funny.
movie about it, and they're running around with Geiger counters in it. I never saw the whole thing. I've only seen clips. But again, this was like early '50s, just before I was even born.
Now with the signs, it's not like a gallery where people get to see a little white card on the wall telling them who made it, and it's still a form of art. Does it trouble you that your work gets noticed, but people usually don't know who did it? Or
No, not
as long
really.
as
I
you
mean,
get paid for the sign, it's who cares?
well, it's nice to be
It's a different monster.
well. No, it's nice to know that like I've worked on like a landmark. Those things. I mean,
Hmm.
that's to satisfy your ego, but you don't really put your name on anything because it detracts from the customer's name. So I know some people
Hmm.
occasionally,
Oh, sure.
some sign painters will put a little tag for themselves in there, but I kind of find that like if you're in a small town somewhere, it would probably make more sense to do something like that. But
Hmm.
here, it's just I have seen it a few times, but I usually leave my name off just because it
Hmm.
looks more professional not to have it on there in the first place. You're
Oh,
trying to
sure.
get your customer business, not yourself per se. You know what I mean? It's sort of a conflict. So you have to take a step back. But I always try and do a really the best I can for the customer and make them happy because it's just cheaper in the long run. You don't have to fix it, and they're happy, and they'll call you back. So,
Hmm.
but I'm grateful I have the work. I can brag about I did this and that. But that's good
Yeah.
enough. That's good enough. I don't need to.
You're definitely all over Los Angeles.
Yeah, well,
Hmm.
I've got some good customers, and so I do end up not only Los Angeles. I just came from Santa Barbara. Did 3 projects up there.
Hmm.
Luckily, I was able to coordinate them because some of the people here in LA
Hmm.
have outposts in Santa Barbara. I've been sent off to Napa and as far south as San Diego to do projects for people.
Now, besides the signs, you do have fine artwork, and some of it doesn't utilize text. You've got, I love the two things that I saw in there that didn't have text. You have these ceramic figurines that like you would get in a gift shop or something,
Yeah.
that are just kind of tchotchkes, but you add leather bondage masks with it that have zippers on the mouth. I love those, and also the poured resin hatchets that have stuff inside of those. How did these series come about?
The figurines were, it was just sort of a protest piece. I was involved with somebody who had these figurines, and when she was a little girl, she used to like play with them. So they was sort of like a thing that she really enjoyed. And some of them are just so well. Um, Effusive.
Saccharin?
Yeah, exactly. They were
Yeah.
nostalgic. They were targeted directly at people's emotions and to try and all that sort of stuff. So I thought
Hmm.
if there was a way to sabotage it, just my own personal goof, just because I wanted to do that, and so
Hmm.
the idea just popped into my head to do something like that. It would be easy enough to do because I use the synthetic rubber tool dip and I just dip their heads in it
Hmm.
repeatedly, and then I clean it all up. But that's
But it totally looks like leather.
yeah. Well, it's synthetic
Yeah.
rubber, and I use women's shoe
Hmm.
straps in parts of it
Hmm.
to make it look finished, to make it look cool, basically.
Hmm.
And the zippers go in with dental
Hmm.
tools. And I sort of trial and errored my way through that. You can't brush that stuff, but you can use a glue applicator with a very thick nozzle to kind of draw with it, sort of. But it doesn't really act like paint. It has much more of an issue with surface tension. There's all these new things that kind of come into play, but you can work with it. And
Hmm.
so I sort of learned my way through that. It wasn't that hard, but it was kind of fun to figure out how to do it. The hatchets were a bridge between two different bodies of work. I was doing a series of guns, and then I was also doing a series of like flowers that was sort of industrial version of flowers. And I was doing a show for the brand library and was invited to. Uh, and I had these two bodies of work, and I thought I need like a transition piece, so it would kind of make sense what these two different ideas were. So I came up with the hatchet, sort of a problem. So, like, oh,
Hmm.
how do I make the connection between here and here? Well, this hatchet kind of does it. So that's why the hatchets have the flowers in them. And I always tried to keep it effeminate. One of the best compliments I ever got was when a woman realized that a man had made this stuff. She was shocked. I'm like, oh, great, that's great. I broke your stereotype.
Now you have another series of oil paintings, and they're mostly titled Mother Ditch. And they look, at first glance, they look like these just nice almost. I mean this in a good way, Bob Ross style landscapes that just happen to include the LA River. And for those of you who aren't in Los Angeles, the LA River is the largest and most glorified drainage ditch. it's it's just cement. Then you can see graffiti on the banks. And when I came in to meet you, you had a bunch of people around you, and I thought, well, I'll come back later. And I had looked at these and thought, oh, they look really nice. He's just showing that he can paint. And I came back later and looked again and realized that the graffiti you've put in the names. One of them had the names of famous philosophers in one painting, and another one had native tribes and explorers on another. What was the inspiration for this, and how do you choose which names to put in there?
Yeah, that was historically tied together, and I thought, well, at the
Hmm.
time they weren't painting out the names in the riverbed, and so it was and I thought, well, I don't
Hmm.
want to paint like Chaco's thing on there, so I started
Yeah,
substituting it
yeah.
with like philosophers, artists, and things like that. And one of the first ones I did were like a bunch of artists, like famous artists, some of which are even my next door
Mm-hmm.
neighbors. I put Lynn Folks' name in it, and so it was just kind of a goof to do that.
Hmm.
And the other fun part for me was to show this big drainage ditch is this is the beginning of the whole city was here. It was this little river
Hmm.
before they sort of tamed it because it kept flooding and people drowned one year, so they fixed it once and
Hmm.
for all. It wasn't very pretty, but they
Yeah.
they solved the problem because the river used to wander all over the valley and then flood periodically.
Hmm. And yeah, and like I don't know if it was the 20s or the 30s, but hundreds of people died in a
Yeah,
massive flood,
yeah, I think it was the 30s.
and that's why they did it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was inspired by that story, and recently they had dug up. There was a redevelopment there in Chinatown next door to
Mm.
Olivera Street, and while they were excavating for
Hmm.
this high rise, they found an original pipe, which they nicknamed Mother Ditch. So
Mm.
that's what gave me the idea for the name. There's a
Nice.
I started doing it in Spanish too, Zandra Madre. or Madre Jean, something like that. So basically, Mother Ditch in Spanish. So that was sort of the inspiration behind it all. That and I wanted to show sort of the imbalance, like the kind of a class warfare issue in there with
Hmm.
Hispanic citizens in the city and how they're treated. That was part of the flavor in some of them.
Do you consider yourself a sign maker first or a fine artist first?
Well, I'd like to consider myself as a fine artist, but I can't sell enough work to make a living. So sign painting
Hmm.
saves my ass, and I make money, and I can afford to stay here, and I got some real estate, and I can afford to keep it up and stuff like that. So it's more of an investment property.
Hmm.
So I've got a little nest egg saved, but I can't sell enough artwork to do any of that. So the
Hmm.
sign painting, I mean, I enjoy it. I try and do the best I can with it, but there's that's where the money is. So, and when I first got
Yeah.
here, I just starved, and I've had decades of poverty. So now I'm finally like I've finally broken the middle class finally, which is seems to me like I'm rich because I've been just so dirt poor for decades that uh, just making it to
Mm.
middle class is a huge relief. Like if I need tires for the truck, I can just buy tires now. Where before you'd struggle just to like replace a flat tire, that sort of thing. So now at least I'm not hand to mouth as much as I used to be, which apparently is better than 2/3 of the country right now. So I'm grateful in that
Yeah.
aspect that I've got work and it's steady. And this one customer, I do oddball things for them. They have some original artwork that they put in their restaurants, and sometimes the customers, for whatever reason, smack at them or bang them or bend them or something like that. So they'll give it to me to
Oh.
fix, and then I've fixed two or three things
Mm.
for their displays. Just because I don't know why.
Hmm.
Sometimes the customers just are horrible. They break things. So I've got this kind of a jack of all trades issue with some of the background also too, because with the signs you work with all these different materials. So I've learned how to work with plexiglass and electricity and all of these other things, which
Mm.
helps with problem solving. And also too, it's like, well, if this part of my business kind of slacks off, I have something else I can do. Luckily, I can just stick with the sign
Hmm.
painting at this point. I've got enough customers. But before, if I needed to I've welded stuff for other artists that commissioned me to like make their projects. I've hand lettered on some of their canvases and subcontracted that way. And I subcontract other sign shops who hire me to do the work. I've always been an artist, but the way to survive is the sign painting.
And I noticed it seems like with Guerrilla Service Project, which is what most people know you from, that's where these two sides, the art and the sign making, really kind of came together for you.
Yeah, well, uh, I had gotten lost years before when I lived in Orange County in that part of the city.
Hmm.
Then when I moved here to the brewery and knew
Hmm.
where everything was by then, by 2 or 3 years later, I drove under the same spot and realized why I got lost the first time back in the 80s. There was no, there was like, there were
Hmm.
signs. I had to look for them to find them. So I can't say there weren't any at
Yeah.
all, but they were really hard to spot. You really had to go out of your way to look, find them even. So I thought, well, they needed to be on the overhead
Hmm.
sign. And since I'm in that line of work, I could just do it. And I thought, well, not only that, but then there's an opportunity to videotape it. I've always wanted to work with film. Uh, so it all just came together like that because I realized once I build the thing and put it up, it's probably going to be lost as it was. So the only thing you'd have would be a video. And this was just before YouTube came out and video editing was just still new because it was all digital, which made it feasible for me to even approach it. So with the technology,
Hmm.
I was able to. I thought, well, yeah, I'll be able to assemble this thing with my experience with
Hmm.
sign painting, and then my directorial debut, and then in acting, and I had to kind of throw it.
Yes.
It all had to kind of go in there to make the project work. So that's really why I did it. And I thought it was a great idea, just to make it a real simple.
Oh, sure.
There's no. I was really concerned about the tone it would set, so I had to be very careful about how that. Again, that to me, that's part of the artwork,
Mm.
so it doesn't uh, seem like a vendetta of any kind. Like, oh, stupid government, blah blah
Hmm.
blah. Like some of these people who rant. Like, no, that's much more complicated than that. And I didn't want to simplify it and vilify anyone either. It was just because that detracts from the idea. So I think one of the reasons why it's so successful is the fact that it was simple, neutral. I'm just doing a public service, and that's all there is to it. The undercurrent being, what is public art? What do you do when you see it? Do you even know if it's public art? Shouldn't we be living with it
Mm.
everywhere? Shouldn't it be more interspersed with our lives? So this is the undercurrent to all of that. The basic idea of why I did
Hmm.
it. It's like, well, it's one for art.
How long were you preparing for this? Like from start to finish, once you had the idea, hey,
Well, it took a few months to gather the data and to study it. There's a again, this was right when the internet was just coming out. There's a manual
hmm,
for traffic control. The abbreviation is MUTC, MUCTED. I forgot what it stood. Municipal Traffic Codes or something to that effect, and it's something you can download as a PDF
hmm,
file online. So I started with that to figure out why it wasn't there in the first place and to what the specs are supposed to be when you put one up. And so I did homework
hmm,
on that and found what sort of materials to use. And then the design element of, well, why wasn't that there in the first place? Which I couldn't find a reason for. I think it was just oversight. Uh,
hmm,
and so I figured all that out. And then I sat on it because I thought, well, if I make this thing and start this, I'm really going to have to do it. Otherwise, I make the sign, I have to look at it and realize I never put it up. So it's going to be like a dead albatross around my neck. So I stalled for a while
hmm.
just because I had to get the courage up to do the last step.
Yeah.
So it took about 2 or 3 months. And then I finally just thought, well, fuck it, I'll just do it.
Well, you really went all out on that last step. You putting the sign on your truck to make it look like it was from a construction company, the vest and the helmet, and you even rigged up that kind of thing that helped you install it, that held it for
Yeah,
you.
it's called a jig. It's a manufacturing
Okay.
term. Yeah, it just kind of holds everything in place. But anybody
Yeah.
who's ever made anything knows what a jig is, and that's basically just a template,
Sure.
sort of, uh, to hold things in place while you put it together. Yeah, because I wanted to make it as simple, as streamlined, and accurate as possible, because I didn't want to hang out there very long at the risk of my
Oh, sure.
health and everyone else's. And why should it take that long? It wasn't that hard. It wasn't that big of a deal.
How much did it all cost?
Well, everything I had was, except for the button reflectors, everything I had was just in stock from other projects. Like somebody wants a sign, I cut
Hmm.
a sheet in half for their sign. I have this extra. And so the same thing with
Hmm.
the paint. That's what happened with the aluminum. The button reflectors, I hunted down and found a company here in town that had some in a warehouse in Tacoma, Washington. So I ordered them
Hmm.
these vintage reflectors because the sign was old. These reflectors needed to kind of look. They had to be on there to look right. So that's why I used those.
Sure.
So I spent like $80 on that. So basically, it was about $80. The rest of it was already paid for by customers. So it didn't cost me very much. If I had to go out and buy the materials, it'd be maybe $200 or so just for the raw materials.
And it stayed there for a while before anybody figured it out, too.
Well,
Like 8 months or something, right?
yeah, it was well, it was 9 months before the story broke in the press. I asked the press to suppress the story because I
Mm-hmm.
wanted it to be up in place and people using it. And then also if it would pass the test that they knew, like if it wasn't correct, they would notice it and take it down. Well, they didn't notice
Mm-hmm.
it because it was done exactly to spec, and they didn't take it down, and it was being used. People were using it,
Mm-hmm.
so that was the reason why I didn't want anyone to know about it for several months because by then it's too late. It's already up and functioning. People
Mm-hmm.
need it. It's proved we needed it. It also proves that it doesn't stick out. That it looks like they did it. It's all copacetic. So that was the reason why I
Mm-hmm.
waited. And I was prepared to wait even longer, but the story started leaking.
Yeah, I saw that the original signs were crushed into a giant cube of scrap metal because they eventually did redo the sign and they scrapped it.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Well, they have a recycling program.
did they give you any heads up that they were gonna?
No,
Yeah,
no,
were they afraid you're gonna use it again or?
no. I don't think it was malicious. I think they just didn't either. They probably
Yeah.
there was probably nobody who remembered it or whatever because it was a what 8 year,
Mm.
8 9 year, not 8 years later. So maybe the people that ordered the
Mm-hmm.
replacement had retired for all I know. I don't know what happened. I
Mm-hmm.
did find that in
Yeah.
2006 they Caltrans started doing a recycling program. So everything they took down and replaced, they would recycle, which is about the only thing I
Mm-hmm.
saw. But this was apparently a routine scheduled, from what I can tell. I mean, maybe not, but from what I can tell, looks like it was just routine maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
But there, I don't know why. There's signs all around that neighborhood that aren't changed and fixed. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say it's
Yeah.
malicious, but because I don't really have any evidence for it.
Sure.
But it doesn't seem like it.
Would have been nice to get it back,
Well,
but
yeah, but it was too late by the time I found out. It was already
sure.
crushed.
How did you track it back down? Because you had pictures on your website of the cube.
There was a blog spot called Franklin Avenue, and they knew about the story,
Hmm.
and they saw the change. And I found out again,
Hmm.
but it was a couple of days, which is why I couldn't get the signs back in time because that those 2 3
Hmm.
days made the difference of being crushed into a block. I did track it down to the contractor
Yeah.
who was in Garden Grove here in Orange County, and right next door to the contractor was the recycler. So by the time I tracked it down, it was already too late. One interesting bit about that story is one of the employees for this contractor thought he had the sign because he said it kind of stuck out.
Hmm.
It didn't quite match all the other ones, so he saved it, thinking it was the one I made. And he was real reluctant to admit it. And I said, "Look, you can keep the thing. I just want to know if you have it or not because it's part of this whole story, to track it down."
Hmm.
He didn't have it. I said, "The back of it is signed. It's in the video. I signed my name on the back of it just in case." And he
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
realized he didn't have it. So
Oh.
after I found the contractor, tracked it down, found this guy, and I told, well, I kind of don't care, if I get it back or not. At this point, I mean, you have it. The possession is 9/10 of the law, kind of thing, and I did put it out in public. So it was like, okay, maybe I could buy it
Hmm.
back from him. Maybe we can put it in a museum because these are, thought process behind it all. But when it turns out he
Sure.
didn't even have the
Sure.
right one, it's like that. Oh well, so that's how that turned out. Man, he the guy was so disappointed when he found out he didn't have the right one. Yeah, both were like, oh well, it's gone.
Now it's been what 23 years since the project.
Yeah,
The world's a pretty different place now. Do you think it could have happened today?
yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, you think the world's a different place, but it isn't. If you just walk around with the
Hmm.
right clothes on and a clipboard and a hard hat, you'll just blend in. People have been doing that too. for
Hmm.
years after my project. If you just look and play the part correctly, no one's going to question you. Not usually.
Now you have a lot of other service projects. Um, that is what you would call them, right?
Well, I don't know what to
Uh,
call them. I wouldn't put them in the
Yeah.
same category. I've got other ideas that are
No.
more protest pieces. Uh,
Okay.
but
I know you have the one with flags that are put up at Mexican American War battleground sites,
yes,
and the flags have 59 stars,
yes, yes, I'm still trying
kind
to
of
put that together.
protesting U.S. imperialism. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. In a nutshell, yes.
And where are those?
Well, they were. Well, there's several points here in the city because the sign's been taken. One, let's see. Well, there's one right. The closest one is here on Hill Street, where Fort Moore was, where there's a
Mhm.
school, and they just put a giant
Oh, okay.
condo thing right in there across the street from it. There's a big monument to it,
Hmm.
and then the Mormons reenact a cannon battle there. I don't know if they do it anymore. I haven't
Hmm.
been there in a while because I ran around documenting the war reenactors for all this stuff, just for the hell of it, to help put together the story. So there's one there. There's one in Vernon. There's one in El Monte. Uh, these are the ones in town. I went up to Fort Sutter near Sacramento, and far south
Hmm.
is Escondido because there was a battle down there. So those were basically the battles around in and around Los Angeles and in and around California.
You put them up at the sites, right?
Yes.
How did you get those up there? Is it again carry the clipboard and look like like you're supposed to be there?
Though some I did at night, trespassing at night with infrared
Mm,
cameras. That was the
yeah.
Rancho Dominguez. That was another site, the Battle of the Old Woman's Gun, and they reenact that every October. So, which is also a retired priest's home, uh, where the family donated part of the property to them, and anyway, it's a park at this point. So I trespassed to put the flag up there. I just
Hmm.
put it up, left it up overnight. Same thing with Fort Sutter. I got there first thing in the morning, just put it up, left it, documented it to see what happens to these things. At least Fort
Hmm.
Sutter, I can see what happened to it. They took it down, folded it up, and brought it into the fort. So I don't know if they still have it or not. And then they brought out their own flag and put it up. So that I have, in the can. I've documented that because I parked the van right next to it to see what would happen and waited. So I do have that, but it was all based on a time. Since we're going to invade Iraq, our history shows we've already like invaded Mexico. So just I tied them together in a 59 star flag. If you had a star at the end of each row in the American flag, nobody sees it because nobody's counting stars. So you can put up a 59 star flag, nobody notices it. I did that
Hmm.
in Vernon in front of the police because I had this uniform on. A couple of instances, I had uniforms on. One was in Vernon, and the other one was in Monterey, which was the first capital of California. I put a flag up there too. So I put on a uniform, or I do it stealthy at night. Uh, so those were basically the two ways I did it to put them up.
And kind of a main theme that I see running through all of your work is that it's often just super subtle, like the 59 star flags, the LA river paintings, um, the way in sign restorations and other signs, you kind of try to hide your work. And even, like the Guerrilla Service project that, you know, you kept that quiet for so long and nobody really noticed. You don't seem like the very shy retiring type, but when it comes to your art, you seem to like to keep it quiet. Why is that?
Well, it depends what the work's doing itself. Because I mean, all your material has its own baggage, no matter what you use. So Uh, I don't know. It seemed to make more sense to me that it wasn't about all just self promotion. I mean, I work in advertising, so it's sort of like at a certain point, it's
Hmm.
awful. So uh, I don't necessarily have to promote it that way. I'd prefer to do it other ways. It depends on what my message is.
Hmm.
If it really has to be a certain way, then uh, it's usually an intellectual reason for like why would you do it this way versus that way. I weigh these possibilities out before I make that decision. Like, well, what does it make sense to do it this way, that way, that sort of thing. So that's why I usually take a subtle approach to it.
Now you've got other projects that are out there. Speaking of subtle and keeping things quiet, you still have some other projects that you haven't divulged.
Well, I risk
How
getting
many are out there?
just a couple, but I risk jail.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to take that chance. I've seen some taggers go out and they'll tag things, post it on Facebook, and they get arrested for it. So just silly. Don't do
Yeah.
that. So I'm not going to do that. I'm
Yeah.
going to wait.
Yeah.
I'll wait 7 years. The reason why I'm even
Yeah.
mentioning the flag project is because it's over 10 years old. I can't be arrested for trespassing anymore. It's too old.
Hmm. How much longer until the statute runs out for
Uh,
these other projects?
about 5 years or so.
Oh, 5 more years?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in no hurry to go to jail. I can wait, you know. So, and there's enough documentation. So if I
Understood.
drop dead, then you can find out, but I'll be dead, so it won't matter, kind of issue. So it's generally how
Sure. Sure.
just to stay safe, and it's not really about
Hmm.
ego so much. It helps to neutralize some of that, but eventually it'll come out. I'm not really worried about that.
Is it mainly just for fun, or is it just
Well,
like the protest
there's
portion of it?
protests, there's fun. I find that more interesting than just making things that are pretty. Pretty isn't enough for me. I want something
Hmm.
more to it than that. I want it to make a statement. If it's pretty, it better have a good reason, not just for its own sake. It was sort of the idea behind the hatchets and things like that. I'm deliberately trying to make those like really
Hmm.
pretty, but it's a hatchet shape. So you're back to this kind of gruesome aspect of it. So there's this conflict.
Hmm.
So I find that more interesting.
Well, Mr. Ankrom, this has definitely been interesting. Thank you so much for being on with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the opportunity for me to brag.
Thanks a bunch. Take care.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you.
And that's it for today's episode. A big thank you to Mr. Ankrom for joining me today, and also to you for listening. Until next time, thank you.